All right. Hello and welcome to Just Animals Podcast. I'm Elle, and with me, as always, is my dad, aka Guy.
Hello, Pod World. Good to see you. Thank you for coming back. We have a
Sam
great.
is
I had to tell you something. I have been
okay.
looking forward to this podcast for over a year, maybe more, like since we started. But we'll get to the backstory. Dr. Troy will love the
Yeah.
backstory. Go ahead.
Okay. Yes. Unfortunately, Sam, the zookeeper, is still swamped with school. We do miss her, but that's where she is. And with us today, we have a very special guest coming in from Mazuri, the food company that we talk about all the time on this show. We have
Yes, we
Dr.
sure
Troy.
do.
Okay, Jesus. We have Dr. Troy with us. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Troy. Why don't you give us, our listeners, a little background on who you are and what you do?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name's Troy Tollefson. I'm a nutritionist from Mazuri. I've been with Mazuri for about 10 years now. And prior to that, I should say, at Mazuri, I do research and development of new diets, help consult with zoos, help them figure out what to feed their animals, and a variety of other customers. Prior to that time, I started the nutrition program at Busch Gardens, where working with a variety of different animals there, kind of like a Disney's Animal Kingdom for any of you that don't know or familiar with Busch Gardens. And then prior to that, I was at Washington State University working with grizzly bears and mule deer and some other species that were there. So kind of work from the research side and the customer side of Mazuri, and now I'm actually making the diet. So kind of all
Wow.
gamuts there.
Wow, you're getting the whole dichotomy there. Was this Busch Gardens in Tampa Bay?
Correct. Correct.
Okay, we've been there.
Yes. I was in the car because I was sick that day,
Yeah, he
and
was he was
oh my
dying,
God, I
but
had some serious whatever, I don't know, and I didn't eat any of the food. All
but
right, well,
anyways,
go
yes,
ahead.
Dr. Troy. So, as a nutritionist, what are the requirements that you have to meet for, I'm sure for different animals there's different nutrition requirements, just like with humans, you need, essential amino acids and whatnot, and essential vitamins. Are there similar requirements for animals?
Yeah, so when you're looking at an exotic animal diet, no matter what it is, guinea pig, cricket, because we'll do anything from crickets to elephants to shark and rays, right? We're working on a variety of different species. As you can imagine, there is not a nutritional requirement known for a lot of these different species. Most of the work and research that I've got in the animal world is with domestic animals, horses, cattle, in the pet world, dogs and cats, right?
Sure,
So we
sure.
have the group of you want to say NRCs, the requirements that are known. Then what
Hmm.
you kind of get into, and what I like about my job, it's the CSI. That's what I like to say is, and that's one thing I love with the research side. There's all these journal articles that are out there where this person's working on this species, this person's working with that species, and it's my job now and in the past is kind of digging into there and figuring out what those requirements are because we don't
Sure.
have like one place to find an insectivore requirement, right? So we have to
Right,
use
right.
carnivores and then we take what's known about the carnivore species and then we go look who's actually done the research with them. And then you kind of
Sure.
tease out that and you kind of build upon that. So I mean that's kind of where it comes through. Every animal has a requirement just like humans.
Sure.
We just
Sure.
don't know about it and so we're doing, the research aspects or someone else is doing the research. Sometimes we do as well to try to figure that out.
So it sounds like there's a lot of trial and error, if I have that correct. I'm sure with formulas and
Uh, there is over time,
Mhm.
right? I mean, some of the species for sharks, for example, have goiters, and so we worked with SeaWorld to help develop that. And then, you kind of get rid of that problem. Enlarged thyroid is a
Right, right.
goiter. And then, over time, we may do other research projects and it builds upon those, right?
Well, you're
Okay.
segueing into a question that I was going to ask further down the road because I even wrote down my questions because I was so excited about you being here. Thank you.
Oh my
So,
god.
Bunny, my daughter, also known as
Okay,
Ellie
just get to the
Pratt,
question.
yeah, so she went to LSU, and Mike the Tiger, the old Mike the Tiger, had cancer. So my question to you is: this some cancer, a captivity type caused disease, or do lions in the
Tigers.
wild, tigers in the
Tigers.
wild, will get cancer as well? So that and maybe you don't even know, but I'm going to throw that out at you.
Yeah, it's not something. Well, I don't know how many tigers in the wild get it. A lot of times their lifespan in the wild isn't the same as what we have in
Correct.
managed care
Correct.
type situations. So they live a lot longer now. And so we run into those type of issues. Now, I'll give you an example. It's not a tiger, but it's something that we've just worked on recently and just developed a new diet for bears. And specifically, we were looking at the polar bears. Now, very similar to a tiger, polar bears are fed primarily a carnivorous diet, right? We can't grind up seals and have our new polar bear diet as a ground up seal in a can type of thing. But what we can do is try to mimic that seal in the diet. Now, what people have historically done, just like a tiger, is hey, they eat meat, right? So they just pump them full of fish and really high protein diets. And polar bears in managed care actually have developed liver and like renal disease,
Oh,
just like tigers do. So Mike the tiger and all these other ones, I mean, they may have cancer, but a lot of tigers in managed care as they get older develop a renal disease. Now with the polar bear, our theory, at least, is when you look back over all these years, they're having these kidney and liver issues and cancer comes in and all this. Their protein requirement is so much lower than what they're actually being fed. And with this new polar bear diet, it's down around 20% protein. But what they're doing in the zoo world is feeding them more like 60% protein and really low fat diets again. But in the wild, they're eating lower protein, high fat
Higher
diets,
fat.
and we're
Yes.
trying to mimic that. And we're looking at
Yes.
fatty acids, seeing if it's
sure.
marine type fatty acids, all that as well.
Yeah.
But that's where it's things like that, and kind of looking in the research, why are they having these health issues? And so similar to Mike the tiger, why are they having these health issues? Instead of trying to put a band-aid, oftentimes the veterinary world may try to do that, and they're fixing the specific problem. As a nutritionist, I'm trying to look and trying to prevent the problem from happening to start
Right.
with.
So let me ask you a question. You mentioned sharks, and they were having a goiter problem, and I think in humans, I'm not a doctor, that is an iodine deficiency. Is that correct? So
Correct. You can have a goiter from either too much iodine or not enough
yes.
iodine. But in the case of sharks, it was a deficiency.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. So then you tweak your food to. I mean, how do you adjust it? Obviously, you're adjusting it up, but how are you making? Are
Yeah,
you
what
making
nutritional
incremental
tweaks did you
adjustments?
make?
Absolutely. So they do that. Now these development of those tablets, they're supplements, so they're tablets that are fed to these sharks, right? Because they're still fed to fish. It was well before my time. I worked for Busch Gardens / SeaWorld and was using the products, but again, these were developed 25, 30 years ago with the veterinary team and the Mazuri team at that time, Nutritionist. My understanding at that point was from talking to the veterinary side that had worked on those, it was a lot of just guessing. It was the nutritionist coming in saying, hey, this is what causes this problem. The veterinarians going, well, we think we need to add this much, and trying to treat it. And so it's kind of coming up together, working together hand in hand with the veterinarian and determining what level that is and then adjusting it from there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Today,
Find
I
a
mean,
proper
how diets
mixture.
are today, we may think that we have a really good diet, but most diets evolve over time. And so even
Sure.
though I could say, hey, this is back to the bear diet, this could be the best bear diet in the world, but as we learn more, they evolve and we tweak them. And the supplements with shark and rays, same thing. We'll be adjusting those over time too.
That
Well,
makes a lot of
I'm
sense.
not standing on any soapbox here, but it's so interesting to hear you say this about the animal diet because the humans are, I think, in my opinion, are suffering from the same thing. We're overdosing on protein and we're not getting enough of the healthy fats that we should be. And when they started this low fat stuff, they took out the fat and increased the sugar for palatability purposes. And look what that did to people. Wasn't low fat at all. It was more. It made them fatter, but okay, that's a detour. Let me ask you this question, and I don't want to make this politicized. I want to stay in Missouri of the world. So you work for Busch Gardens. How long were you there?
4 years.
4 years. All right. So it's kind of a double-edged sword, I would think, in terms of it's nice to be able to go and see these lovely animals,
Mhm.
but an orca is not having the proper exercise or space that an orca needs. How did you mentally resolve that in your mind? I'm sure you know that you're a nutrition scientist for animals, and you're probably if you're probably pro animal. In other words, it's like yeah. So I just I wanted you to explain it in your own words how you mentally resolved. Hey, this orca is in captivity. Yes, they're being fed well, and they don't have to worry about predators, but they
Yeah,
really
so
don't.
I mean that's a very good question. With me, how I've always looked at it, regardless of whatever species is managed care, whether it's a large animal or a small animal, how I kind of look at it is the representation of that animal in that zoo environment helps the younger generations actually connect with them. I'd love to say that, here in Utah where I am, there's a nice uh, antelope island, has bison and deer and all antelope that are out there roaming free out there. I love that. I love going out there. I love driving up to Yellowstone, right? But unfortunately, how the world is today, all those habitats are being decreased. And, regardless of whatever species it is, and, polar bears with, whatever side you fall on global warming, there is less ice and that is adjusting their habitat. Now, with me, when I kind of combine that with watching my own kids grow up, when I was a kid, I would go out to my grandma's house. She had a chicken coop, and we would, get a chicken for Sunday evening dinner, or, you know, and but today there is that connection that tends to seem to lose or lose that connection with animals to some extent. Not everybody, but and I've even watched it with my kids, and they don't have the same experiences of going out there and having the animals, or my other grandparents that had cattle and different things like that. And today we're more urban, less rural, and so those zoos give us an opportunity to have that connection back with those animals. So in my mind, what I've always liked is it helps people and myself get that connection with them. And then it's up to the people that are managing those which species to have and how to manage them to give them the best life. And now my role today is really I'm not worried about that as much as in the Busch Gardens world they were worried about that. Today in my world, it's just best how to care for those animals nutritionally and how to give them the best diet and mimic those diets so we can have that connection. But that kind of makes sense. I mean, that's kind of where
Yes. Yeah, and I know you're not representing Mazuri. You're just speaking on your own, and I just wanted to see where you came out on that because it's, I used to like think, oh, Ringling Brothers must be taking really good care of these elephants, because they're expensive and they're part of the show, and I would hope that they were taking good care of them. But they're not having. I don't know how the elephant feels about being a performer. They're not doing elephant stuff and whatever. So it's hard for my brain to reconcile it. I do like seeing them. I mean, I think they're just great animals, but it's that dilemma. It's a dilemma. What can I say?
Well, I can give you just a different perspective, right? So you're thinking about as the population and the habitats decrease. We work with some endangered species. One of them is the outwater prairie chicken, and developing a diet for them, right? And so there's a few zoos that have them and do a reproduction program, and then help put them back out in the wild. And they really need to be in a managed care type settings, or they go extinct. So
Yeah.
it's where that balance is in the going back to my university days. Having that population and having that genetic pool large enough to be able to reproduce and get it as those habitats are decreasing, we kind of humanity has to decide what you know which animal. I mean, we're not going to be able to save all the species, And we can't keep all the species, as habitat decreases, we have to either figure out a better way to do it out, in big rangeland type settings, or figure out better ways to manage them, on a day-to-day basis. So.
Right.
Okay, well, I appreciate
Right.
your answer. We'll get back to animal nutrition.
Okay.
So
Now I have a question. I have a question.
hurry up because I got to get
Oh,
back to my questions.
okay. Yeah. Great. Thanks for sharing. You're so kind. So it seems like you're constantly evaluating and reevaluating your formulas for various animals. Like with the sharks or with the polar bear diet, you're finding, oh, maybe too much protein. We need more fat. I mean, so are you constantly revisiting every formula you've come up with, or do you have like what's your system for reevaluating formulas? Is it, hey, we're having a problem with bears over here, they're showing symptoms of an iodine deficiency or a vitamin K deficiency, we need to reevaluate their nutrition? Or do you have a list you just kind of work up and down, or is it kind of both?
No, it's a very good question. And we have so many different diets, right?
Right.
You do.
And it, we don't really go off of a list. Some of the
Okay.
diets that are older over time, they haven't changed for quite a while.
Right.
We don't plan to. But as we come out with a new diet, like when we did some hoof stock diets and the evolution of lower starch, it's better for a ruminant, better for the rumen health, and things like that. The other diets may stay there, but as like our team is then educating our customers, here's a better new and improved diet, and we recommend you moving or transitioning over to that diet, right? Other times, and then over time we'll delete, obsolete those older diets and move on. In other cases, we you know we find out more about a species like the bear diet and we make adjustments, or in this case we recreated a new diet. We didn't like update that one. It's like, okay, throw
Just
that one out and here comes
right.
a new diet. In some
Yeah.
cases it may be just tweaking a diet and here's some new features and benefits. We've learned something, so we've kind of tweaked it. And a tortoise diet was a good example, where we've taken those tortoise diets and evolved it into a lower starch, added some timothy hay, grass based, and and things like that. So,
Oh,
but but back to your original question, a lot of it has to do where we're constantly communicating with veterinarians and curators and keepers and talking to them. And I'm one of 5 different people on the technical team. And
okay.
so while we have, so we're all talking to them. And then in combination, we're talking to our sales team that kind of manage the different areas, and they're going out and visiting zoos. So
Right.
there's a kind of a network of and kind of listening to where the issues are. And we do
Okay.
research projects and talking to the
Sure.
owners.
Of course. Okay.
So, with respect to carnivores, is the stuff that you're producing for carnivores more of a supplement as opposed to pure, just
Raw
like
meat.
they can live on this diet? I mean, they need meat, right?
I, so yes, carnivores themselves, we have supplements. We do have a complete diet for exotic felines and more omnivorous ones like a bear or a wolf diet. We have that, and the products that are used to create these diets do contain meat. They're not like plant-based products, right? It's kind of a combination depending on what that species is, how much it has in it. But a lot of people have the misconception that carnivores can't, so take a cat, can't digest corn, for example. They can. When it goes through a cooking process and you can pull those nutrients out there, and they're not necessarily bad for the cat. It's kind of what that balance is, and you're looking at how much meat and protein, and you're balancing out to what that complete diet is. They don't, in the wild, they're eating other parts. They're not eating just pure meat. And here's a good example. A research paper that was published a long time ago. There was 2 lions. And it happened to be in a different country, but they were feeding. One lion was eating uh, the nice filet mignon type steak meat, right? So picture that, just really good meat, pretty low fat, And then the other lion was eating kind of the scraps. Now it was more the dominant lion that was eating that really nice meat, while that other lion got to develop, eat what was left essentially, intestines and what have you. And what happened was that lion eating that really good meat developed a thiamine deficiency. It's not even something you think about typically with carnivores,
No.
but you
Wow.
need all your vitamins and minerals. And so you start developing a thiamine issue, and they resolved it once they were able to figure that out. But you got to think about all the pieces. It's just because they're a cat or a carnivore, they don't eat just meat. They still need all those other essential parts, and fiber's part of it,
Yeah.
and everything else. So,
Well, it's just like the human diet. You need a certain amount of protein. You need a certain amount of essential fatty acids. You need some carbohydrates, not a ton like where diet is. But what? How do you how do you get information about some animals synthesize vitamin C and certain proteins, right? Unlike humans. So obviously, you're adjusting your diet for what they can make themselves. Is that right? And how do
correct,
you? Yeah,
correct. Like a ruminant, for example, and that's an animal with a four-chambered stomach. So a cow, a horse, or not a horse, I'm sorry, a cow, a deer, a giraffe. They're a ruminant,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
They can produce a lot of the B vitamins in their stomach, unless they're a young one and a calf that their stomach isn't really developed yet, and they'll need more vitamins. But as they develop and they're starting to eat food on their own, they can produce it. So we don't need to add a ton of them. You can, there's circumstances where some of those can cause a deficiency as well, but you don't need as much. Now, that's done, and we don't know on a giraffe, and we don't know how much they can produce in there. Where we have to take our the requirement side is looking at the domestic animals and saying this is our best guess, and so we want to add some, and not water soluble. They're not toxic. You can add a little bit higher, just like animals, and they'll pee it out. You don't want to be wasteful, and you don't want to add too much, but you can you kind of put a safe level in there. Other you know ingredients like fat soluble ones, of course, then you got to be a little more careful and not put such extreme. But you have to again look at what's out there, what research is done, and then in some cases, some people have done research with other species, non-domestic, and then you look at that as well, whether it's vitamin C in different ones.
So are you depending on outside research for the eating patterns of the animals, or does your company do any field
You
work
mean eating
where?
pattern or like nutritional
Well,
needs?
nutrition, in other words, like, okay, let's stick with the giraffe. So, they eat leaves from a tree. I don't know what else, what type of trees they like, their preference, but, and then it's the quantity of it. So, are you mostly depending on outside research for your formulations, or are you doing any field research to develop the formulations?
It's a combination of both. So the majority of diets are going to we're all there's going to always be more research out there than we could do ourselves. We're going to have a limited amount of budget. um, but we work with research partners. So one of our research partners, one of the universities, it went out and took a trip to the Congo over like Thanksgiving break. One of the professors did, and looking at field research with chimpanzees and trying to gain some insight into that. We don't do a lot of field research, but there. In other times, we're looking at trials. When we created again our wild herbivore diet, the low starch, we worked with the university and looked at different aspects, or like you know we've looked at it in terms of doing what the energy is into using mule deer as an example for giraffe, because we can there's one of the universities that I came from that have mule deer, so we've used those to look at some of our hoof stock type diets and getting digestibilities and energy. And then we've looked at flaxseed and the omega-3 fatty acids, and looked at low iron type diets as well. And sometimes we'll do those and use the mule deer, or we've used the horse as an example of looking at phytoestrogens and for white rhinos, and looking at as a model, because we can't do that research on the white rhinos. And so you'll do aspects of the research with different in collaboration with different universities, because we don't have those species.
Gotcha.
Now, part of our company, right, Mazuri's owned by Purina Mills, which is then owned by Land O'Lakes. So we're kind of encompasses a larger company. Purina Mills has a research farm, but it's more focused on the domestic animal side. So for us, we don't have access to that. When we developed our tortoise diet, we worked with Cal Poly on leopard tortoises on a clutch of that were from the same clutch of eggs. So
Oh,
there's
that's
a
awesome.
variety of different things that we get involved with in research.
So does Purina ever tell you don't come into this business product? I mean, they want to be dog food and whatever, horse food, and they say you stay out of that. You can have everything but these products. Is that how they divide the
Well,
turf, so
Purina
to speak?
Mills, yeah. So one thing real quick. So there's two Purinas, and they used to be the same company, and they split apart. So you used to have
Oh,
Purina Mills, which is
yeah.
owned by Land O'Lakes. That's agricultural horse, cattle, sheep, all
Okay.
that type of stuff. You have Purina Dog and Cat, that's owned by Nestle. Same,
Oh,
share the same Purina logo because
right.
they
Yeah.
used to be the same company, but today they're two separate.
Oh,
So it's kind of
okay.
interesting. However, to your point, we do have a pet food division too, just not called Purina. But everybody kind of splits it up. There is some crossover sometimes with some of
Sure.
there's rabbit food made by that side, and we sell rabbit food. But when it gets really into the exotic side, they tend to stay out
Right.
from,
It sounds
Okay.
kind of more like your bread and butter, the exotics. And I have a question too. So, in the managed care setting, unfortunately, people can be cruel, or not cruel, but people will give animals, try to feed them hot Cheetos or whatever. Do you have any formulas or anything to like, excuse me, to counteract those things when they eat something that they're not supposed to, or like, hey, our skunk has an upset stomach, or our chimpanzee has an upset stomach. Do you have like the sick diet essentially, or
That would be the vet would probably do that,
Yeah,
but
but someone has to come up with that formula, with that nutritional formula.
right, and that's usually like the nutrition that's on site. For
Okay.
us, we don't develop any of those like more medical type diets.
Okay. Or
so
like weight
That's
loss diet.
we had a Dalmatian once, and he had too much protein, and he was peeing blood. So we had to put him on a low protein diet. We had to get special food. Do you have those types of specialty food products, or you don't get into that?
we don't really typically get into those too much.
Okay.
I mean, we do have some custom diets out there for some specific, but not generally.
So I have a question for you, and I'm reading your bio off of the Mazuri site. He also conducted milk studies for white rhinoceros and manatees. Tell me about what a milk study is.
So when I was at Busch Gardens, we were looking. I wanted to find. Well, we had quite a few rhinos, and they reproduced very often. Quite often, and we wanted to better understand what the milk of a white rhino was. And so I worked with the National Zoo as they look at a lot of the milk repository they have, and person there, Mike Powers, had done this for years. And so we wanted to say, okay, let's see what's in it. I can collect the milk and take a look at it because I know milk changes over time. As a nutritionist, if you take an animal and you start feeding them when they're first born versus 6 months down the road, that milk has changed over time. And so do we understand then, are we hitting what those targets, and creating a better formula for them? And that's what my thought process was. Today I don't work with the milk formulas, but then that was what we did. And so we went in, and the keepers would actually collect the milk. It wasn't me collecting the milk. They would go in, the rhinos came in, and they could hand milk a rhino and collect that milk, and then
Wow.
we sent it off to the National Zoo, who then analyzed it, and they kind of took it from there at that point. My part was that
What
the
percent fat was in that milk? I bet you it was pretty high percent fat.
I can't I honestly can't remember right now what
That's
the
fine.
fat and protein is.
We'll let you slide.
The
Uh,
other one that was really interesting though was the manatee one. Now manatees, they come in for like cold stress in Florida,
Right.
and you have all these babies that are coming in, and they were not doing well
Oh.
in a managed care. They would come in, and they were hit pretty hard, and so the milk formulas they were using human milk formula, which was not appropriate for a manatee. So I worked with one of the veterinarians at SeaWorld, and we created a formula. We adjusted the amino acid component and the protein, and I was trying to mimic the fat, or medium chain fatty acids, and looking at that fatty acid profile and tailored it.
coconut oil. Coconut oil.
Yeah, yep. And there was like four different fats, but it was interesting because they just weren't getting what they needed, and they were already fighting just to get over that cold stress, and
Sure.
then getting a diet that was causing some GI issues
Eek.
that it was hard for them to recover. And so by us
Oh,
mimicking that diet, that was able to help them. Yeah, you look like you're going
no,
to say something.
we talked about this because we've done the manatee, and we were talking about the manatee feeding, and like in the captive setting, it was at SeaWorld that they came up with a special. I think Sam might have visited there or something. That's our zookeeper. She's on hiatus right now, but she said that they did have to come up with a special formula for the calves because the human formula was not working for them, and so it's just funny that it's coming full circle. And it sounds like you were one of those people that helped come up with the super secret manatee calf formula.
Yeah, that was my formula that I came up with.
Oh,
So
that was your
I'm
form.
working
So
with the
now you're the
veterinarian
guy.
Laura Croft. That yeah, so we kind of she was telling me all the issues that they were having, and and then I was tweaking that formula, and it worked out well.
Oh,
Yeah.
this is so awesome. It's coming full circle, and you're the manatee calf formula guy now too. You can add that. That's
So I
awesome.
wanted to ask you a question. I was just looking at the website with respect to primates, and primates, are they omnivore? Most apes.
Yeah, I mean it's not that they're not going to eat meat; they can, but
I
yeah, they're
mean,
they're more plant based.
So, do animals ever get bored eating primate growth and repro biscuits or monkey crunch 20 or primate maintenance biscuit? Um, or does the zoo mix it up a little bit, and obviously they're
well,
eating
Sam has talked
bananas.
about enrichment. You know how they'll give them little treats and stuff, or
Yeah.
random fruits
And
and veggies.
and at feeding time, do you know most establishments make them look for the food, or do they just put it in a bowl and yeah, do you know how that's done?
You have a whole gamut of how people feed them, right? When I was at the zoo, for example, I mean, we had tubs going out to our all of our primates. The challenge is, and you were talking about this with human food, so I'll kind of back up just a little bit.
Yeah.
But one is the appropriate food items, and then what do you do with those food items, right? So I want to get back to the appropriate, but what they do with them is sometimes they'll put them out in the yard and spread it on the ground. But when we were in Florida, one of our orangutans died. I can't remember the species of amoeba, but there was one of the amoeba that got into the brain because it was contaminated from the ground, and
Oh boy.
they had to change how they were feeding practices. So just
Sure.
throwing the food on the ground wasn't good. Now, but that's kind of that was a rare circumstance and
Right.
doesn't happen all the time. But you have to think about that. Is there any issues with contamination or throwing it out
Hmm.
in the feces? It gets contaminated with feces, what have you.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
Right.
a very
Um,
good point.
but the problem is that the animals may or may not get bored, you know, but I mean, I can't think like a chimpanzee or a gorilla or any of these other primates, right? But what I can tell you from a nutrition standpoint, some of the foods that are fed to them aren't appropriate. And there's some really good research done more recently talking about the sugar content. And so how you were saying people have too much carbohydrates or sugar in their diet. Well, it's the same exact thing with primates because the the diets that are fed to primates are often the fruits that we eat. The fruits that we eat have been developed to be high sugar and low fiber. What they eat are actually high fiber and low sugar.
Right.
And there's some research done recently, last couple of years, that was looking at reducing the sugar content of primate diets. And when they reduced it and eliminated it from those diets, it actually reduced aggression.
Oh,
And so they
wow.
weren't
Wow.
as aggressive.
That's
And
phenomenal.
yeah, and so just the fact of just taking that one component out of their diet, that high sugar content, it actually helped. And there is a correlation with some regurgitation and things that primates will do with the higher sugar type diets. But that aggression piece, and that was big. And what we try to do today is educate. I just got back from a zoo conference last week, and I wasn't there was some other nutritionists there, and they actually spoke about produce and mentioned that aggression side of things. And it's a interesting concept because what zoo world often tries to do is give them the variety and the things that taste good to us when we have to take a step back and go in and that, yeah, you're right, that tastes good, but we need to do it in limited amounts and, you know,
Right. Make sure we're actually meeting their
and not
nutritional
feed it
needs.
as the daily in that bowl, the daily diet, you know, make it, you
Right.
can make them work for it or train them, you know, use it for rewards and things like that.
Right.
So,
It's a little tricky.
unlike Coke, Coke will not make the world a happy place. I think that's a lie. It's what
Yeah.
there's.
So I have a question back to the rhinos. So I'm sure you're the nutrition expert. And what Sam was telling us too is that a lot of rhinos in captivity usually end up dying from iron overload disorder or disease or whatever. They have like just too much iron in their system. Do you guys have a rhino formula and do you have something to like counteract that? Or are you cognizant of that in your formulas?
Yeah,
If you
we do.
do have a rhino
It's for
formula?
black rhinoceroses that
Hmm.
have that. The white rhinoceroses don't have that iron overload. And just a difference, there's a browser versus a grazer type species, and those browser type rhinos have more of this iron issue. We have a low iron diet. That totally issue with that has not been solved today. It's gotten
Right.
better, and this our low iron helps. But once
Sure.
it builds up over time,
Right. I mean, there's not much you can do
it's
once
hard
it's
to
in
get rid
there.
of it. And
Right.
what they've done in the veterinary world will do is actually bleed the rhino, and it helps them kind of get back and get that iron
Sure.
level done. And
Sure.
we've worked with zoos that have been tracking it for a long period of time, and we developed that diet with
Oh,
Disney's Animal Kingdom, for example, and
that's
they've
awesome.
tracked it and watched it. And that veterinarian uh, has worked with. He created a browser or a Black Rhino symposium, and all these nutritionists got together, veterinarians, uh, and discussed how can we better create the diet and published a bunch of papers, but we still haven't solved the problem, unfortunately.
Sure. Sure. Well,
But
it's
What
we've
great
is
you
the
guys
helped
are
it.
working
it
at it.
Yeah?
Absolutely.
What
And
is the ramifications or symptoms of excess of iron in an animal?
they can
What
have some
happens?
skin issues, but ultimately you have death that
yeah,
comes out
Oh
of it.
eventually.
boy, I
And yeah, so you have to watch it over time, and you could see some sores that were developed on them on some of the rhinos when I saw it when I was in the zoo. And it's you don't it takes time to build it up, but you watch that iron level raise, and it doesn't just get flushed out of your system. Unfortunately, it's not a good
Right.
mechanism. And actually to your other question, or are there things you can add? You can add chelators to it. It's a tricky thing about adding those because you can actually do more detriment than
Right.
helpful. So
It's that fine line, I'm sure, of like,
it
okay, we're
is.
trying to,
is that excess iron observed in the wild, or is it only a captivity type of phenomena?
It more in the yeah, it's managed care type settings where you're doing it. And a lot of it, we're not adding iron to a lot of our
right, of
diets.
course, of
It
course.
comes in from the ingredients that are used out there in the soil and people fertilizing and what have you. So it's a challenge actually creating that lower iron diet because so many ingredients have higher iron. But that's only part of the story. I went to a zoo, and I won't name the zoo because I don't want to call them out, but
Oh,
they
sure.
had their black rhino there, and I asked, have you analyzed the grass? And they analyzed the grass, and it was like at 1,500 parts per million iron when it should be like a couple hundred, right?
Eek.
So that habitat was picking up a lot of iron from that
Right.
soil, and so then
Right.
the rhinos out there eating that grass had nothing to do with like our diet that we're feeding. So you have to look at the hay, you have to look at the complete diet of understanding what it is.
Right. Oh, that actually brings up a good point. So yeah, so those, ungulates or those things, those grass eaters, browsers, grazers, do you have to, not only your formulated diets and whatnot, but do you ever go into other zoos and whatnot and be like, oh, I see they're eating these grasses. See you've got these shrubs. Have you tested them for these contents when you're doing, I guess, like a panel or a workup panel on a diet or nutrition for a certain animal?
Yeah, when we do talk to them, that's one of the things. I'm an elephant nutrition advisor, and so when I talk about to different zoos about what they're feeding their elephants, that's the first thing I ask, right? Is that hay? Or sometimes have analyzed it, sometimes they've analyzed it,
Right.
and looking at it in combination with what that zoo is, and then here's the other portion of your diet. This is where it falls, right? Here's where those vitamins and minerals fall, and is it compared to what the recommendation is for elephants? but we do analyze it sometimes in the zoos, but it's really up to the zoo to analyze it and track it for themselves.
Right. Okay.
Does the nutrition content of hay vary through the season or where it's geographically grown? I mean, that you probably it's not a very nutritionally dense food, right? It's more fiber than anything else, which that's important too. But um, do veterinarians or zoos monitor
The
the
nutritional
nutritional
value of
quality
it?
of that raw food that they're getting in? Not your food. I'm talking about just like hay
Sure.
or
So,
oats.
yes, some zoos will look at like hay over time. Now, first, there's a lot of energy out of hay.
Oh,
So
there is.
yeah,
I
so
thought it was.
an elephant may eat 10 pounds of our diet, but then they
Yeah.
eat 90 pounds of hay. That
Oh,
hay
wow.
is probably 90% dry matter, and they're able and adapted to digest that, right? Those hindgut fermenters like an elephant, a gorilla, or the foregut, those ruminants, they have that bacteria that can actually break down that hay, and they pull a lot of energy out from that. Now, but some of a carnivore, no, they're not. A bear's not going to be able to I mean, they do digest plant matter, but it's a lot lower. And when it's in a situation like that, but um, they, oh, now I lost my train of thought with
Yeah,
It's
I'm
with
sorry.
okay.
Did the dog feet distract you?
It's okay. I'm going to ask you a different question, and
all right, all
I
right.
saw
Shoot
this on
now.
TV once, and I'm not sure where, but is it true that a baby elephant has to eat some excrement in order to get some that thing going on in their stomach to help them with digestion? Have you heard about
Like the
this?
same bacteria?
It helps, and so sometimes when animals they get antibiotics, for example, and it wipes out that bacteria, the microbes in their gut, and taking a fecal, from their mom and making a fecal slurry and then feeding it to that animal helps it get that bacteria in there. It's the
Hmm.
same thing as the elephant, baby elephant. They'll pick it up on the ground and they'll get it from that environment. It helps its stat to begin, and then it kind of grows from there.
Gotcha. So they do have. Okay, I wasn't sure if that was true, but it sounds logical. I mean, probiotics or whatever they call it. Bio, what do they call it? Biome?
The biome, yeah,
Yeah,
microbiome.
right, right.
So, birds of prey, do you have special pellets or special nutrition? Is there Missouri for birds of prey? Or I don't know what your fun name would be, but have you worked on any of those?
So we do have a bird of prey gel, but most of our diets aren't. They're more supplements for these guys,
Okay.
making sure, especially like fish eating, not birds of prey, but like the fish eating ones will have thiamine and vitamin E and some other stuff,
Okay.
but those two main ingredients. It's the same
Okay.
thing with the birds of prey. They can get some to fill in, and you may have to add some supplement if they're feeding whole prey. They could be depending on what they're eating. If they're eating chicks, for example, you could be low in iron because
Okay.
poultry's fairly low in iron, and
Sure.
so you got to, and copper. So you kind of got to look at what they're being fed and whether how well you need a supplement, or do they have enough diversity that requires
Right.
less.
Right. So,
Sorry
step.
for asking this question, but what is a calitrid? Caltrid?
Calitrichid.
Yeah, what is that? I don't know what that is.
That's the kind of the easier way to say it's kind of the little primates.
Little
Oh,
primates.
okay. Like spider
Yeah, just
monkeys?
so yeah. There's a variety of different ones that people look at them and what they feed, and so um, yeah, whole gamut of them. But so those calcitrichid gels, we'll feed them out to, the spider monkeys or lemur. I mean, lemur's not a calcitrichid, but you feed them out to a lot of these smaller ones that are out there.
Well, I noticed you have the no glucose. You have the meets the need of diabetic insectivorous primates. So, other than primates, are there other animals that will suffer from diabetes?
Dogs.
Oh
Dogs
yeah,
can get diabetes.
primates
Cats can get
are. I
diabetes.
mean, like orangutans, but any species can. It, over time as they age, right? In the wild, you're not going to see it as much, but you know, we're trying to have we're trying to maximize the lifespan of these animals and manage care. And
Right.
so if they're fed a high sugary diet, whatever animal they are, and the sugar I'm talking about is fruit, not necessarily, you know,
Like from
just
candy.
sugar. Yeah. But it can, if they gain too much weight and you're spiking that insulin up all the time over years, then they can definitely have those problems. And we
Oh,
ran into some in the zoo. So
So
yeah,
in the
that's a good
wild, a
point.
chimpanzee or an ape, they won't just, I mean, if they had the opportunity, it won't be just straight up bananas. I mean, they're going to be eating other things, leaves, and I don't know what else, but will they self manage and self regulate themselves in the wild?
oftentimes, it's not always the case. In some cases, they'll have a tendency when that orangutan, there'll be a production of fruit, just a huge production of fruit that happens not every year, maybe every 3 years or something, and they'll gorge and eat that over that time, and they'll eat what's available to them. And most animals will find that niche and eat enough variety that they don't have issues. There are some cases where they don't necessarily choose the best, but it's kind of natural selection is going to favor those that do choose the best. So they've
Gotcha.
kind of done that.
So for the vitamins, or like in humans, vitamin A is a fat soluble vitamin that you don't want to have an excessive amount of. Uh, does does that also impact the animal world where they have to be concerned about certain? Well, we had the issue with the iron, but of fat soluble vitamins, are they a concern of having too much with certain other
Oh,
species?
absolutely. I'll give you an example. So pelicans, right? There's case studies with pelicans, and they're given, they eat a lot of fish,
Yeah.
but that fish isn't nutritionally complete. And so they're giving supplements to kind of fill in those gaps of what those pelicans need.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you, there was one case study where they were given too many supplements, fed twice the amount on the supplement. Once that happens, unfortunately, though, you have too much vitamin E, which then was interacting with the animal, uh, and they work against each other. And so if you have too much of a supplement, that can cause a problem. In this case, with vitamin K, um, and cause mortality with the pelicans. Now it's fat soluble. It's not always that sensitive where you feed just a little bit too much. But just like people, you can't feed it too high because those supplements, no matter if they're fat soluble or minerals, they interact with other nutrients in your
Right.
body. In this case, it was with vitamin K, which then caused health problems with those pelicans and caused them to die. But not enough of it is problematic too. And the interesting about vitamin E, people think it's fat, it is fat soluble and it does stay in the body somewhat, but
Mm-hmm.
it does need to be supplemented regularly. It's not the same as a water soluble, which is gone pretty quickly, but
Yeah.
once it gets incorporated in that body, it doesn't quite get used the same with a lot of different species. And so it kind of need regular supplementation of it. Just can't go too high.
Do primates synthesize vitamin D like we do?
Um, my understanding is yes. The I'm trying to remember if I don't know if they do from anything that I recall. But the one challenge you have with any species is how much sunlight they have
Right.
and how much like hair coverage, right?
Sure. Sure.
For us, if you go up into the northern climates, I used to live in Washington State, and during summertime, I mean wintertime, the sun will come kind of at a slight angle and go back up, but we're also dressed pretty warm and not letting a lot of sunlight into us to get that vitamin D. It's the same
Okay.
thing with animals. So those
Okay. Yeah.
northern climates where they don't get outside or they're going to have to be supplemented as you move farther south and they're outside more, those primates, if they have more access, they can get it. They don't need as much vitamin D, but we add it into our diets at the same amount to kind of give that coverage because we can't really, that animal there may get it, but this animal doesn't, and so it's kind of a mixture. We assume as the new making the food that the animal isn't getting much vitamin D, and the vitamin D that they get from the sunlight isn't going to be toxicity problem.
Right.
It's only toxicity from the vitamin D that you give them to eat.
Right.
What they get from the sunlight isn't going to cause a toxicity.
Gotcha.
So
I have
when
a
you're
question.
using vitamin E and vitamin D, are you using the natural vitamin E? Like there's a D alpha, and that's the artificial vitamin E, and the D3 vitamin D is the better of the vitamin D. Are you using those versions?
So yes and no. So like vitamin E, we'll use natural and synthetic. Synthetic works really well for a lot of animals, and it's a group of like 8 isomers versus you get the natural and you get one isomer. Elephants and rhinos absolutely need that natural vitamin E. They won't absorb the synthetic well. Other species, on
Interesting.
the other hand, can, and so you can do it. There's always, you're thinking about cost when you create a diet. You're thinking about stability of those vitamins and how well they're stable. And the naturals tend not to be quite as stable as a synthetic that it's a
Oh,
little
that
bit
makes
more
sense.
durable over time.
Sure.
And you have a combination of these other isomers or that interact with the body as well too and have different functions.
So since most of your food is dry based, what should zoos and places like bush gardens be concerned with respect to essential fatty acids, which I don't know how well that travels in a dry formulation.
Yeah, no, it's a good question, and that is a challenge with any dry diet, no matter what it is. And we do make a gamut of diets. We make a gel, meal. The gel, you add water and you mix it up into that. And liquid diets like a Lori diet. But you're right, the majority of them are these dry diets. And when you go through that process, and you can call it cooking process, where those extruded products or pelleted products are made, it can destroy a lot of those essential fatty acids. And so you add them to the diet. You may add them in terms of fish, fish meal, fish oil, and it's more that process that get directly to like DHA or EPA. Um, Flaxseed is in there. We got to be careful with flaxseed because it can oxidize pretty easily, and so the high heat of that. But you get the essential fatty acids were definitely something that we try to do, but you're still limited on what ingredients you can actually do. And some species don't need direct like the fish oil and everything, but we do add it in our diets and thinking about it.
Okay.
Okay.
I have a
Well, I'm going to
question.
let you ask the last question, Bunny. But
Okay, good. Quiet.
Dr. Troy, I thank you so much for coming on. I've been trying for a year to get Mazuri to respond to me, and we finally got you. And I
Yeah, we
hope
might have
that
to give.
you
We're
have
probably gonna have
enjoyed
to have
this
you come
time
on
and
for two.
peppering you with all these weird questions. We are not animal specialists. We just like animals. Okay, so we're like
Sure.
layman animal liking people, not.
Well, with the
And we
exception of
do.
Sam.
Yeah, she worked at a zoo, and she
She's
has
worked
a
at
degree
multiple
in
zoos.
zoology.
Yeah.
Um, I didn't make it past chemistry, and that's why I didn't become a veterinarian. I see, because when they didn't tell me chemistry was a math class, and I thought it was going to be like biology, which I loved biology and did great. But then when I got to chemistry, I was like, whoa, wait a minute now. This is not this is math. This is not fun like science, which I'm sure you excelled in the chemistry aspect of it. But I'm going to go back and fill that gap before I pass away. I'm going to go back and get past chemistry. I promise you, I will do that. But I will be prepared mathematically before I take that challenge on. Uh, but yeah, thank you very, very much for spending the time with us. I really do appreciate it. Bunny, you can
Yeah, but
wrap it
before
up.
we go here, so let's say you were going to create a nutrition or a meal plan, not meal plan. You're going to create a formula from scratch. Let's say for an ocelot. How does an animal nutritionist go about creating different formulas and
Oh,
products?
that's a good question.
Yeah,
Thank
really
you.
good question. Um, it's really looking. So the first thing you're gonna do, right? First, you got to make sure you know what species that is, right?
Hmm.
The ocelot, and you're looking at it, and then you're looking. Well, I go into the journal world, journal article world, where all this published research has been, and I try to, I pull up as many articles I can find.
Sure.
It's kind of doing a research search where you're looking at nutrition, ocelot, and you're trying to
Right.
pull up what do people really know about it, and where
Right.
does that fall, And so then I look at that, and then then look at any similar type species or research that's been done, um, in that category. And then once you kind of establish where you want those target values, then I'll go in and look at what ingredients that we have that can mimic it. Right? We
Sure.
can't take like I said early on today, we can't grind up ring seals and feed it to a
Right.
polar bear, right?
Right.
So what do we have available to us? And not only
Right.
what is available to us, what's approved to use in animal
Sure.
diets? Because there's a
Right.
AFCO regulations that
Sure.
allow X, Y, and Z ingredients to be used in animal diets. And if it falls
Right.
outside there, even if that species may eat it or use it, or eat it in the wild, we
Right.
can't use it necessarily.
Right.
So you
Right.
have to see where it is. And then we try to mimic the nutrition, not necessarily mimic the ingredients of the diet. I mean, yes, you use
Gotcha.
meat products if you're trying to, or plant protein. It depends on where you are and what where you're going. But then once you create that diet, I could think it's the best diet in the world, but we have to do some testing. We need to go
Right.
see, well, does the animal even like it? Is it palatable to the animal? Do the keepers and curators, do they like it? That's just as important. If they get it, they don't like the diet, the way it looks, way it smells, uh, you know, it may not even make it to the animal. So we work with them, and in some cases we'll do research with universities, or we'll send them out to zoos and a variety of different people to get their input and say, hey, this worked or didn't work. And I'll give you one last example. When I did that, again, going back to that tortoise diet,
Hmm.
we had it done and did all the studies with the university, sent it out to all these individuals. And here's a tortoise diet. They don't need sugar.
Right.
Had some fructose in it, right? They don't need
Right.
it. Let's just pull it all out and that's it. And I left it out for a while. All
Right.
my feedback coming back, they will not eat it that well. So some of them, like Aldabras and those large tortoises, oh, they
Right.
had no problem with it. Once you
Right.
started getting down to the littler tortoises,
Like gopher
no, they
tortoises.
would not eat it. And so I had
Oh.
to add a tiny bit back into it.
Right.
Um, Not from the nutrition side, I didn't want to add any, but the
Right. Of
animal
course.
wouldn't eat it. And I had to
Right.
add just a tad bit of fructose in
Right.
there, um, for that flavoring for that animal.
Right.
And again, you're kind of creating those diets based on the nutrition, and
Sure.
then what that animal will actually eat, so you can get it into them.
Right. Yeah, that's my last question too was, animal taste testing, will they just turn their nose up to it like I'm not eating, bat it away or, if maybe it's a primate, throw it back at you like what is this nonsense? Have you ever been there when an animal has turned its nose up at a formula you've created?
Um, Not really, but some of my stories when I created a hay enhancer, it was a grain-free hay enhancer elephant supplement, really designed to be fed really low amount in the diet, like 5%.
Sure.
And what the elephants did at this one facility, now there again, they were fed a variety of different foods, and they tried to switch it really quickly in a
Right.
high sugary type thing situation. They actually took those pellets and threw them back at the keepers. So,
That's
so
funny.
That's awesome.
you'll do you kind of you got to be careful about that feedback of what you get.
Right.
When we did a previous bear diet, um, the iteration before this one that we just did, I sent it out to the zoo, and I wanted the wolves because it was very similar. I just wanted to see how wolves would they
Sure, of
even
course.
find interest in it, and do they
Right.
like it? And there was a lot of fish oil, and I didn't know what they would take. Now these
Right.
wolves were normally fed a meat-based diet. They didn't feed a pellet, right?
Right.
They they found interest in it to
Mhm.
roll on it.
Oh.
They wouldn't eat it for the life of them, but they liked that smell and they were rolling all through it and gave them pretty good enrichment.
It was gross
So
enough for them to wanna roll in it, but not gross enough to eat it.
exactly. So there's a so but that what your point is very valid. It's listening to the animals, what the animals are telling you, and how can we make adjustments to that diet, and what do we need to do.
That's pretty funny that the elephants threw it back and then the wolves were just like, well, this is gross enough to roll in. Like I like
Yeah.
the scent on me. This is perfect. That's pretty
Well,
funny. You could market that too. It's like we make great wolf scent.
yeah. Dr. Troy, one of the things that you said that just really struck a chord with me, and you should do this study on this animal called the Homo sapiens, is sugar and aggression.
Okay,
No, I mean, I think that transcends to us. I really
I'm sure
do.
it does,
I
but
mean, when you think about the epidemic of diabetes and obesity that we are having as a species, it's sad. I don't know what the number is, 40 to 60% obesity. And with that, what percentage of those people are diabetic? We are killing ourselves. And I'm not, the aggression part is just fat. I haven't heard of that, but it makes perfect sense to me. And you should do the Homo sapien study on that, because you will project yourself to some either fame or infamy. Maybe unfortunately, a lot of our health organizations like the American Diabetic and Cardio, they're all sponsored by Big Pharma and Big Food. And I know you work for Land O'Lakes. I have no issue with Land O'Lakes, but the lobbyists and money, we don't hear the truth. I mean, initially during the Eisenhower administration, I forget the doctor's name, he was telling us that was causing all the cardiac issues, the fat, and then they took the fat out, and look what happened. So there are healthy fats and there are not healthy fats, and I don't have to lecture you on that. You know all about that already. But it's just a phenomenal. When I heard you say sugar and aggression, it's just like, wow. It's another thing about too much
yeah, was
sugar.
that surprising to you too when you found that out? Were you kind of taken aback? Were you like, oh, that actually makes sense?
It kind of made sense. I mean, just thinking
Hmm.
about what it is and what I know about animals, and it wasn't
Right.
surprising to me. I didn't know that correlation would be as strong as what it was.
Right.
And so, but again, it's just showing, trying to create those diets that we think taste good to us.
Yeah.
Right.
What you're talking about, that and carrying it, we tend as a society carry it over to our animals, whether it's
Sure.
in the zoo world or it's our pet dogs at home, right?
Yep.
And
Yep.
so,
Oh, Dr.
yeah.
Troy, I can't tell you how many obese dogs I
There
see
it is.
walking
Okay,
around.
can you get off the obesity thing?
No, it's terrible, because we like and you know what? The obese people are walking obese dogs. It's
Okay, great. We're
there's a
not
high
talking.
correlation there between the
You have no scientific evidence for that. You're just
it's my
conjecture.
observational
Your
science.
observational conjecture. Okay.
Yeah.
Anyways,
All right,
so
Dr.
yeah. So
Troy,
thank you.
thank you
Yes,
so
thank you
much.
so much for your time, Dr. Troy. This was great. Hopefully, we would love to have you back on the show
Yeah,
again.
I would love to have you back. I'm going to just be
Okay,
efficient
you're
and
probably
have him
overwhelming
on.
him. You're overwhelming him. Leave him
No,
alone.
I think I hope he thinks we asked him some good questions as laymen, but I don't know. You know.
Yeah, no, I'm good. Thank you for having me on. I
Yep.
appreciate it.
Yeah,
I enjoy it.
you're
So,
great.
yeah.
All right.
Absolutely. And then if you hang on for one sorry about that, for 1 second, we'd love to send you an official Just Animals shirt. But yes, thank you so much for coming on the show. As always, send us an email, Just Animals Pod. Find us on Instagram. And then if you have any questions for Dr. Troy, you can send them to us at our email or our Instagram. And thank you as always for listening. Also, don't forget we have merch up, so go ahead and check that out. The link is in our bio and in the episode description. Have a great evening or day wherever you are in the world, everyone. Goodbye.